The stench hit him first, a thick cloying miasma of cordite, damp earth, and something sickeningly sweet that clung to the back of the throat. It was the signature perfume of the Okinawan campaign, a battle fought not just over ridges and beaches, but through a subterranean world of limestone caves and burial tombs that the Imperial Japanese Army had turned into a fortress. Kenji, a Nisei linguist attached to the U.S. Army's 27th Infantry Division, knew the smell better than he knew the faces of the men in his own platoon. He was a bridge, a voice in the dark, his Japanese face and California accent, a paradox that confused the enemy and unnerved his allies. "Anything, Ken?" Sergeant Frank Miller's voice was a low, gravelly rumble behind him. Miller was a mountain of a man from Ohio, his face permanently etched with the grime and fatigue of the island-hopping war. He trusted Kenji's ears more than his own, but his eyes still held a sliver of suspicion. To Miller, and many others, Kenji looked like the enemy they were paid to kill. "Quiet, Sarge. Too quiet," Kenji replied, his M1 rifle held low. They were on the southern tip of the island, pushing through what was left of a small village near the town of Itaman. The advance had been brutal. General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr. was throwing everything the 10th Army had at the Shuri line, and the resistance under General Mitsuru Ushijima was fanatical. Every inch was paid for in blood. The village was a ruin of splintered wood and smoldering thatch. A lone sugar-cane field rustled nearby, its green stalks whispering secrets to the humid wind. It was from that direction Kenji had heard the shot, followed by a faint, choked cry. He gestured with his hand, and the squad fanned out, weapons ready. "Cave flushers, let's go," Miller grunted. "Tanaka, you're up. Do your thing." That was Kenji's job. He would approach the dark maws of the caves that pockmarked the landscape and call out in the language his parents had taught him, the language of the enemy. It was a surreal performance. He'd plead, cajole, and promise, his voice a beacon of false hope in the darkness. "Date Koi," he would shout, his voice echoing into the earth. "Come out. We are American soldiers. We will not harm you. You will be given water and food. Anshin shite kudasai. Please be at ease." Sometimes, terrified civilians would emerge, their faces masks of hunger and fear. Other times, a grenade would be his only answer. Today there was no answer at all from the nearest cave. Just the whisper of the wind through the cane. Something felt wrong. He pushed past the cave entrance, his gut twisting. He followed a narrow, muddy path that led behind the remnants of a larger structure, perhaps a community hall or an aid station. The smell of antiseptic and decay grew stronger, and then he saw it. Tied to a thick wooden post, the kind used to support a roof, was a woman. Her head was slumped forward, her long black hair matted with dirt and blood. She wore the tattered remnants of a nurse's uniform. Her wrists and ankles were bound tightly with coarse rope, cutting into her flesh. Pinned to the front of her simple white blouse was a crude sign, a piece of white cloth with two stark, angry characters painted in black ink. Kenji froze. His blood ran cold. He had seen death in every imaginable form on this godforsaken island. But this was different. This was a message. He could read the characters as easily as he could read the stop sign on a corner back home in Sacramento. Lee Che-je, Urajiri Mono, traitor. His gaze flickered from the sign to the woman's face. A thin trickle of blood ran from her temple. She was unconscious. Or perhaps... He took a hesitant step forward, his rifle forgotten in his hands. A soft moan, barely a breath, escaped her lips. She was alive. For a moment, the war, the squad, Sergeant Miller, it all faded away. There was only the woman, the post, and the brutal, damning word that branded her. His hand instinctively moved not to his weapon, but to the hilt of the Kabar knife on his belt, not to fight, but to cut her free. "Get back, Tanaka!" Miller's voice was a whip crack, yanking Kenji from his trance. It could be a booby trap. They leave bodies wired all the time. The other soldiers in the squad tensed, their rifles swiveling to scan the ruined structures and the rustling cane field. To them, the woman was bait, another cruel trick in a war defined by them. But Kenji saw the shallow, ragged breaths. He saw the way the skin was rubbed raw and bleeding beneath the ropes. "She's alive, Sarge," Kenji said, his voice low and firm, not turning around. "She's not a trap." Ignoring Miller's curse, Kenji holstered his rifle and drew his key bar. He worked quickly, his fingers surprisingly deft. The blade sawed through the coarse hemp fibers binding her wrists. The ropes fell away, leaving angry red welts. He moved to her ankles, the stench of stale blood and sweat thick in the air. As the last rope was cut, her body slumped forward, and Kenji caught her before she could hit the ground. She was lighter than he expected, a fragile collection of bones wrapped in soiled fabric. He eased her down, cradling her head. He unclipped his canteen, unscrewed the cap with trembling hands, and gently touched the cool metal to her cracked lips. "Water," he whispered in English, then switched to Japanese. "Mizu desu, yukuri nonde kudasai." It's water. Please drink slowly. A few drops spilled past her lips, tracing a clean path through the grime on her chin. Her eyelids fluttered. Slowly they opened. Her gaze, clouded with pain and exhaustion, found his. For a heartbeat, there was only confusion. Then, stark terror. Her eyes widened, not at the American uniform, but at his Japanese face. A strangled gasp escaped her throat, and she tried to scramble away, a wounded animal recoiling from a perceived threat. "Shh, shh," Kenji soothed, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. "Watashi wa mikata desu. I'm a friend. I am an American soldier." The statement was a contradiction she couldn't process. An enemy face speaking an ally's words. It made no sense. Miller stomped over, his patience worn thin. "What's she saying? Ask her where the rest of them are. There has to be a command post in one of these caves." Kenji ignored the sergeant for a moment, his focus entirely on the terrified woman. He looked into her eyes, trying to convey a sincerity he hoped could bridge the chasm of war and identity between them. "Anata no namae wa? What is your name?" She stared at him, her breathing still hitched with fear. The sounds of distant artillery, the relentless typhoon of steel that characterized the American assault, rumbled again, shaking the very ground they sat on. The brief moment of quiet was over. Finally, a whisper. So quiet, he had to lean in to hear it. "Hana." "Hana," Kenji repeated softly. He turned to Miller. "Her name is Hana. She's a nurse. She's in shock, Sarge. I don't think she can tell us much right now." "A nurse, huh?" Miller grunted, his eyes falling on the sign that had fallen to the ground. He nudged it with his boot. "Then why'd her own people string her up and call her a traitor? Ask her that." Kenji knelt again, his voice gentle. "Neize anata wa uragiri mono tu." Why did they call you a traitor?" Hannah's eyes filled with a fresh wave of despair. She squeezed them shut, shaking her head as if to ward off a terrible memory. She wouldn't or couldn't answer. She just curled into a tighter ball, her small body trembling uncontrollably. Kenji looked up at Miller, a silent plea in his eyes. For all his gruffness, Miller was a practical man. An officer who surrendered was rare. A nurse might have worked in an underground hospital, might know the layout of the tunnels that were costing the 27th Division so many lives. "All right," Miller sighed, rubbing the back of his thick neck. "Get her patched up as best you can. Give her more water. She's a POW now, a potentially valuable one. We take her with us. Let's move out. This place gives me the creeps." As one of the medics tended to Hana's wounds, Kenji retrieved the piece of cloth with the damning characters. He folded it carefully and tucked it into his pocket. It felt heavy, like a stone. It was a piece of a puzzle he felt compelled to solve. Later that night, huddled in a foxhole under a starless sky, he would pull out a small, worn notebook and a pencil stub. From the diary of Corporal Kenji Tanaka, May 22nd, 1945. "Today I found a ghost. A Japanese woman, a nurse named Hana, left for dead by her own soldiers. Pinned to her chest was a sign, Traitor. Her eyes when she saw me, it wasn't the uniform that scared her. It was my face. I tried to tell her I was a friend, but how can you explain such a thing in a world gone mad? Her own people called her a traitor. For what? For wanting to live? For tending to the wrong person? As we march deeper into this hell, I can't shake the feeling that, in this war, I look in the mirror and see a traitor's face myself. A traitor to the blood of my parents, or a patriot to the country of my birth. Today, looking at her, I felt I was looking at my own reflection. The march south was a descent into a charnel house. They moved in fits and starts, a broken rhythm dictated by machine gun fire and artillery barrages. For 2 days, Hana remained a silent ghost in their midst. She walked when she could, her steps unsteady, and when she stumbled, Kenji was there to support her, his hand on her elbow, a point of contact she neither accepted nor rejected. He shared his K-rations with her, watching as she nibbled on a dry cracker with the slow, methodical movements of someone relearning how to eat. She drank water greedily, but said nothing. To the rest of the squad, she was a burden, a piece of living intelligence that refused to talk. Sergeant Miller's patience, never a deep well, was running dry. "This is getting us nowhere, Tanaka," he growled during a brief halt behind a limestone ridge. The air was thick with the buzz of flies and the distant crump of mortars. "We've lost 3 men since we picked her up. She has to know something. Tunnels, troop strength, anything. Press her. That's an order." "She's terrified, Sarge," Kenji argued, his voice low. "If I push too hard, she'll shut down completely. Her own people tried to execute her. Give it time." "Time is something General Buckner isn't giving us," Miller retorted, spitting a stream of tobacco juice. "We don't have time. Make it happen." The pressure weighed on Kenji as heavily as his pack. He was caught between his duty as a soldier and a burgeoning sense of duty to the broken woman whose crime he couldn't comprehend. He understood the Japanese military mind, the doctrine of Gyokusai, the honorable death, the refusal to surrender. To show mercy, to preserve life when doctrine demanded death, was a profound act of rebellion. Was that her sin? Late that afternoon, the sky opened up. A torrential downpour, common for May in Okinawa, turned the battlefield into a quagmire of red mud. Shells began to rain down with renewed ferocity, and the whistle of their descent was a constant scream. "In here! Move!" Miller bellowed, pointing toward a large, turtle-shell-shaped structure built into the side of a hill. It was a haka, an Okinawan family tomb. Desecrating the dead was the last thing on anyone's mind when the alternative was joining them. The men scrambled inside, crowding into the dark, damp space. The air was cool and smelled of old stone and something else, something sacred and still. In the gloom, Kenji could make out the shapes of large ceramic urns, kameko holding the bones of ancestors. The war raged outside, but within the tomb there was a profound, almost suffocating silence. Kenji helped Hana to a sitting position against a stone wall, away from the others. He pulled a D-bar from his rations and broke off a piece. He offered it to her. For the first time, she looked directly at him, her eyes searching his face in the dim light filtering through the entrance. She took the chocolate, her fingers brushing his. "Arigato," she whispered. "Thank you." It was the first word she had spoken to him in 2 days. Kenji's heart leapt. He sat beside her, the cold stone seeping through his fatigues. "You are safe in here," he said in Japanese. "They cannot reach us." She took a small bite of the chocolate, and a tear traced a path down her dusty cheek. It seemed the simple act of kindness had broken a dam within her. "They said I was weak," she murmured, her voice raspy from disuse. "That my spirit was contaminated." Kenji leaned closer, straining to hear her. "Contaminated by what?" Hana stared at the ancient urns lining the wall, her gaze distant. "I was assigned to an underground field hospital near Shuri, the wounded. There were so many, soldiers and the local people, old men, mothers, children. They were starving, dying of wounds we could not treat." She paused, taking a shuddering breath. "A young officer, he was barely a boy. He ordered me to give the last of the morphine to a wounded colonel, but there was a little girl. Her leg, it was shattered, her screaming." Hana's voice broke. She covered her face with her hands. The muffled sound of her sobs filled the sacred space, a counterpoint to the thunder of the American guns outside. Kenji didn't press her. He just sat beside her in the silence of the tomb, understanding dawning like a terrible gray sunrise. He now knew the nature of her crime. It wasn't an act of espionage. It was an act of humanity. 3 days later, they reached a rear echelon command post, a frantic hive of activity buzzing with jeeps, ambulances, and weary soldiers. Hana, slightly stronger but still enveloped in a shroud of quiet trauma, was designated a high-priority prisoner of war. She was taken to a makeshift interrogation tent, and Kenji was ordered to accompany her. The order came down from Captain Wallace, a sharp-featured intelligence officer from G2 Section, 10th Army Headquarters. Inside the tent, the air was hot and stale. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows. Captain Wallace sat behind a rickety wooden table, a file open before him. Sergeant Miller stood by the tent flap, arms crossed. "Corporal Tanaka," Wallace began, his voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "This is Nurse Hana-san." He nodded curtly at her. She was working in a command hospital near the Shuri line. She knows the tunnel layouts, command structures, everything. General Buckner is about to launch the final push. The information she has could save hundreds, maybe thousands of American lives. Your job is to get it. Kenji's stomach tightened. This was no longer about kindness or survival. This was a formal interrogation. He was no longer a soldier offering a piece of chocolate. He was an instrument of the war machine. He pulled a crate over and sat facing Hana. She looked smaller under the harsh glare of the bulb, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He started gently, in Japanese. "Hana-san, we are in a safe place now," he said. "This is Captain Wallace. He needs to understand what the situation is like inside the Japanese lines. Can you tell us about the hospital?" Hana stared at the dirt floor. She began to speak, her voice a monotone, recounting the horrors of the underground hospital. She described the lack of supplies, the endless stream of wounded, the smell of gangrene. She confirmed she had worked in a large network of tunnels dug into the hills south of Shuri Castle. Wallace leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "Ask her for specifics: entrances, ventilation shafts, ammunition storage locations." Kenji relayed the questions. "Taicho wa tonaru no iriguchi ya danyaku ko no basho o shiritagate imasu." The captain wants to know the location of tunnel entrances and ammunition stores. Hana flinched as if struck. She looked up at Kenji, her eyes filled with a new kind of pain, the pain of betrayal. "You want me to tell you how to kill them?" she whispered. "The soldiers, the other nurses, they are still in there. They are my people." "They left you to die," Kenji stated, his voice harder than he intended. He felt Wallace's impatient gaze on his back. "They tied you to a post and branded you a traitor." He pulled the folded piece of cloth from his pocket and laid it on the crate between them. The black characters seemed to absorb the light. "Li Chi Je." Hana stared at the sign, and all the color drained from her face. "I gave morphine to a dying child," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of defiance and grief. "The officer said I wasted it. He said I had been corrupted by Western weakness, that compassion for a civilian was a betrayal of the Emperor. He struck me. And then She couldn't finish. A silence fell over the tent, broken only by a generator humming somewhere outside. Kenji felt a profound sense of shame. He was asking her to commit the very act for which she had been condemned, to choose a side, to betray a people. Her crime was choosing humanity over doctrine. Now he was demanding she choose his side's doctrine over what was left of her people. He turned to the captain. "Sir, she's telling me about the conditions. The morale is shattered. They have almost no medical supplies left. The soldiers are being told to fight to the last man. She's confirming what we already suspect." "That's not what I asked for, Corporal," Wallace snapped. "I need a map. I need targetable intelligence. Push her. Remind her she's a prisoner of war. Remind her what we can do and what the Kempitai will do to her family if she's ever sent back. You know the drill." The unspoken threat hung in the air. Kenji's hands clenched into fists. He had used those threats before, whispered them into the darkness of caves to frighten soldiers. He had played on their fear of the secret police, their fear for their families back home. It was a vile but effective tool, but he couldn't do it to her. He couldn't use the same cruelty she had already suffered. He turned back to Hana. Her eyes were locked on his, pleading. In that moment, the lines of the war blurred. He wasn't just an American Nisei. She wasn't just a Japanese POW. They were two people of the same heritage, caught on opposite sides of a brutal conflict, both branded as potential traitors by the worlds they inhabited. From the diary of Corporal Kenji Tanaka, May 26, 1945. "Today I was an interrogator. I was ordered to break a woman who had already been broken. Captain Wallace wanted a map to the gates of hell, and he wanted her to draw it. He wanted me to threaten her, to use her family, to become the monster she fled. I saw the look in her eyes. It was the same look I saw in the mirror this morning. She was called a traitor for an act of mercy. If I force her to betray the men in those tunnels, men who are starving, dying, and convinced they are doing their duty, what does that make me? I am a soldier. My duty is to my country, to the men in my squad. But my conscience is at war with my uniform. The silence in the tent stretched, thick and heavy. Captain Wallace's stare was a physical weight on Kenji's shoulders. Sergeant Miller shifted his feet by the entrance, the sound of his boots grinding on the dirt floor, a punctuation mark to the tension. Kenji looked from the cold, expectant face of his superior officer to the haunted, pleading eyes of the woman before him. He was a fulcrum, a single point upon which two immense forces were pressing. Obey and break her. Disobey and face the consequences. But there was a third way. He had not been chosen for this role simply because he could translate words. He was a bridge between cultures, and now he had to be a bridge between warring definitions of duty. He leaned forward, deliberately turning his body to slightly shield Hana from Wallace's direct line of sight. He ignored the captain and spoke to her, his voice barely above a whisper, a conspiratorial tone that was for them alone. "Wasurete kudasai," he said softly in Japanese. "Forget what he asks. Forget the soldiers and the guns." He paused, letting the words settle. "You told me about the little girl, the one you tried to save. Were there others? Other children in the caves? Other mothers? Old ones?" Hana looked up, her brow furrowed in confusion. This was not the question she expected. This was not about military strategy. She nodded slowly. "Many, the people of the village. They were told the Americans were monsters. They were ordered into the caves for protection. But there is no food, no medicine for them. This was it, the key." Kenji pressed gently. "The American attack is coming, Hana-san. General Buckner will not stop. They will seal the caves, they will use explosives, fire. You have seen their weapons. The soldiers will die fighting. It is their way. But the civilians, the children, they will die with them, trapped in the dark." He saw a flicker in her eyes. It wasn't fear or coercion. It was the dawning horror of a nurse visualizing a ward she could not save. "You chose to save one girl's life, and they called you a traitor for it," Kenji continued, his voice resonating with an empathy that transcended language. Perhaps you can save the others now. Not for the American army, for them. Tell me where the civilians are. Tell me which caves hold the families, not the soldiers. Tell me how to reach the children." He was no longer asking her to betray her people. He was asking her to be what she was, a caregiver. He was offering her a chance to perform the ultimate act of nursing on the grandest scale. Tears welled in Hana's eyes and streamed down her face, but these were not tears of pain or terror. They were tears of agonizing release. She began to speak. Her voice was low and rushed, a torrent of information. She didn't draw a map of gun emplacements or command bunkers. She drew a map of human suffering. The easternmost cave in the Itomen Ridge. It was the old storehouse. They keep the women and children there. Look for a large banyan tree near the entrance. She described the makeshift infirmary where the elderly were dying of dysentery. She told him about the tunnel that ran behind the main barracks, where off-duty nurses tried to care for orphaned infants. It was military intelligence of the most intimate and valuable kind. Kenji translated, his voice a flat, professional monotone that betrayed none of the emotion of the moment. Captain Wallace listened, initially frustrated, then with growing intensity. He scribbled notes furiously. This wasn't a blueprint for an attack, but it was a guide for avoiding a massacre, or, from his pragmatic view, a way to minimize civilian casualties that would bog down the advance. He got his intelligence. When Hana finished, she was spent, leaning against the crate as if her bones had turned to liquid. The interrogation was over. "Get her to the POW camp," Wallace said to Miller, his voice holding a new grudging respect. He looked at Kenji. "Good work, Corporal. That was effective." As Miller led Hana away, she paused at the tent flap and looked back at Kenji. She didn't speak, but her eyes conveyed a universe of gratitude and understanding. She had not been a traitor. She had been a nurse. Kenji nodded once, a small, sharp gesture. "Ikita kudasai," he thought. "Please live." From the diary of Corporal Kenji Tanaka, May 27th, 1945. Tonight, I finally understand the sign they pinned to her blouse. Traitor. In their world, a world that demands death, choosing life is the ultimate betrayal. Her compassion was a rebellion. Today, in that tent, I was ordered to extinguish that rebellion. Instead, I used it. We got the information. Perhaps some lives will be saved. American lives, yes, but maybe Okinawan lives too. I walked the line between my duty and my soul, and I don't feel like I fell. Hana was not the traitor. The war is the traitor. It betrays everyone. It takes men and turns them into monsters, and it punishes those who refuse to become one. I still have the sign. I will keep it. It's a reminder that sometimes the most honorable thing a person can be is a traitor to a terrible cause.